Um, Senator Clarkson, as we've been doing on this particular bill, uh, you can run the committee. I may exercise a little more authority as we get towards the end to move us to a vote. Okay?
You may do what you'd like. You're our chair. So I thought we're live. Great. Good morning. This is Senate Economic Development. And we are today discussing rental. We're beginning with discussing S79 rental housing health and safety bill. And we're in the final stages of this discussion, at least for this point, this stage. I thought, Mr. Chair, that we would sort of start with some of the concerns that we hadn't necessarily fully settled yesterday. And Sean has written some very thoughtful stuff and responded to some of the questions we raised. And I thought Sean could just tee it up by addressing some of those with the results from the Vhip pilot of last 2020 and still going on, and then address the sort of remaining issue of the ADUs and other issues that we want to chat about. But we've got answers to bunches of the questions that were raised yesterday. So Sean, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Sean Gilpin with the Department of Housing and Community Development. And I don't know if it will add or remove from the confusion, but so what's being referred to now as the Vhip pilot was what we ran with CARES Act funding and was titled at the time the Rehousing Recovery Program. So in case anyone sees reference to that in the various documents we provided you, that is the explanation. As noted, we worked with the 5 home ownership centers. As everyone remembers, the CRF funds uses of that got extended very late towards their deadline, which was originally the end of calendar year 2020. So there was quite a lot of scrambling at the end, towards the end of the program, or as the program seemed to be coming to an end, to get extensions based on supply chain and labor chain disruptions due to COVID. And then, of course, at the 11th hour, our esteemed U.S. delegation elected to extend the use of that funds for an additional year, which explains why we're still wrapping up a bit of that program. So to date, we've completed 206 units. There's still probably about 40 or so in the pipeline. Of those 206, 75 of those units were leased up with somebody who was referred by the Continuum of Care, our homeless service providers. The average grant per unit was $24,220, which was obviously a little, shouldn't do math in public, as I've heard said, but it's a little less than 20% below the max $30,000 grant. There was a 10% match in for the program.
Sean, can I ask a question, Sean?
Of course.
Because I may have missed this. I just want to be clear, and you may have already answered it. So there was a time when this program had a 20% match and an $8,000 cap. Is that correct?
It's actually in 2017, NeighborWorks of Western Vermont ran what was then called the Bennington pilot, which informed what became the Vhip proposal. The program that NeighborWorks ran in 2017 was an $8,000 grant it was actually a 2-to-1 match. And most recently, the Vhip has suggested a 20% match, which is above, obviously, the Rehousing Recovery Program. The CARES Act had a 10% and a $30,000 maximum grant. And so just to explain that a little bit, so the $30,000 amount was admittedly a bit of a trial and error. The goal of the CARES Act funding was to get as many units online as quickly as possible so that we could get people out of doubled up situations, out of congregate shelters, out of the motels. So just to, again, do a little public math exercise, with a $24,220 average grant and a 10% match, that means the average project cost about $26,000, which obviously is, just shy of that $30,000 mark. One would imagine that if the projects were significantly more than that, cost significantly more than that, somebody would take out the maximum grant. And those that did take out the maximum generally exceeded that 10% match. And if a project was obviously less than that, you wouldn't take out, more than you needed to. So I think we actually did hit a pretty good sweet spot with that 30,000.
So is there no quote unquote Vhip program between the time of the Bennington pilot until the CARES Act money came in?
You approved such programs, but it never got, and the bills never passed out. So we've discussed this for a number of years, but
right.
I think last it was in S-163,
Right.
but that obviously got sidelined by CARES. So there hasn't been an active Vhip program since 2017.
And in 163, did we suggest $1 million?
If I recall correctly, yes, that was.
And did we have program parameters in that bill?
Yes, there were, although they did not go to the extent that we've suggested in terms of housing the homeless.
Right. So we
Well,
now have a longer term for affordability, and the back to the 20% match, and we now have a pilot under our belt, 2 pilots really, to help inform our work. So we're in a much better place than we were 2 years ago when we were first discussing this.
So I'm just trying to determine, when we passed it out, we did some work with the administration, we got testimony, and we put some guardrails on the program in 163. I'm just trying to get a straight answer as to what those guardrails were.
Sure. The guardrails in 163 were a $7,000 cap with a 2-to-1 match and 7 years of affordability at the HUD fair market rent. And it had nothing in there about the income of the individuals coming into the units that were put together, nor their homelessness status, which are both things that have been included in the new parameters.
And it had nothing to do with the means testing on the owner or the landlord either, right?
Correct. And I would.
That continues now, right? Under what you're proposing?
Correct. There's no direct means testing other than the discretion of the homeownership centers when they're assessing applications.
So just so I understand this, because we don't have a report yet on the history of this $7 million program. When you got this federal money, you departed significantly with whatever beginning legislative direction you were given. You went from a 2-to-1 match to a 10% match.
Well, the legislative
went from a $7,000 cap to a $30,000 cap. I don't even recall you asking for anything near that in the legislation. What changed your mind?
The CARES Act funds were not actually tied to the Vhip proposal. It was its own separate program, hence the Rehousing Recovery Program name.
Correct.
That was, frankly, DHCD was given fairly wide latitude in the appropriating language as to what program we could establish to get units online as quickly as possible. Okay.
And the appropriation being asked for by the governor now is $3 million on an ongoing basis, or is there a $1 million figure there in one time? Just tell me what the governor's proposing.
Certainly. The governor's proposal for the rental portion of Vhip is a $3 million one-time allocation. The $1 million was an ongoing allocation that was applied to the homeowner version, which is not in this bill.
Okay. Wow. So the $3 million is one time. We've been dealing with one-time monies in this fast track bill. No, I don't think anybody's really approached us about advancing that $3 million to this bill versus the budget. Have you had any conversations about that at all?
My understanding is that the 3 million allocation is included in the budget bill.
No, I know the budget bill, but we're
Okay.
dealing with a bill called H315, which has passed the House already and is going to probably pass the Senate next week. That takes a lot of the one-time money from the budget bill and appropriates it now to get a head start on that money. And our committee is in the process of making recommendations to the Appropriations Committee saying, let's not wait, for instance, on this $3 million for Vhip. Let's get it out to the door now because it may impact their ability to hire contractors, shovel-ready projects, and we're doing that for brownfields, for a lot of homeless money with VHCB, we're doing
Mortgage.
mortgage assistance, and this wasn't on our list yet, but no one's ever come to us and suggested that you might benefit from an early release of the one-time money the governor is suggesting.
To be completely honest, I think that having this one-time $3 million allocation attached to fiscal year 2022, so starting July 1, would actually be beneficial for us to work with the homeownership centers to sort of ramp up and consider what their role is going to be. The 6.2 and then up to $7 million program that was run over a course of the better part of 6 months was an incredible stretch. It was an unsustainable amount of work for the HOCs. So I think having a little breathing room would actually be helpful.
And
Okay.
it sounds like there are 44 projects still in the pipeline that are being completed.
Correct. A majority of those, I believe, are slated to be completed by, or perhaps not a majority, but a good portion of those are slated to be completed by the end of this month. But there still are, some challenges with supply chain when it comes to things like windows, cabinets, appliances are still very difficult to find.
Okay, so we're going to continue on, but committee, I just want you to understand my scheduling and thinking on this. It's my hope that within the next 45 minutes, we vote something out on this bill, but this bill does have to go to finance and appropriations. And I'm feeling like, at least on this Vhip piece, we haven't fine-tuned where we want to be. And let me explain that. We definitely dealt with this issue in 163 and came up with the eligibility criteria and guardrails and stuff for the program. In the CARES money, the administration, in its wisdom, departed. The circumstances are somewhat different, but they departed significantly from the legislative advice, at least as it came out of the Senate. So I'm asking myself why the significant changes, and we're starting to hear why. But if we can't get comfortable with numbers like the cap or the cost sharing or other things today, because it's crossover, I would like to just vote it out and reserve the right to hear further testimony briefly from Sean and others to get our comfort level at those about those levels, because it does seem like it's a significant departure from what we have already voted in the past. So with that, and I'm sorry for the interruption, it's a perfect segue for you to continue on as to why the changes that you put forward in the CARES funding are still applicable for this potentially permanent long-term program.
Certainly. So first, I've already reached out to a number of folks at the homeownership centers who are involved on the ground with this, and there's certainly a willingness for them to come in next week to provide more granularity on exactly who the project was able to serve. I'll preview that by saying that I think we were able with this project to first off deal with some pretty significant structural issues that would likely not have been addressed. In some cases, it was emergency situations where some families, multiple families, would have been displaced had the project not been in place to address said issues. For instance, as I mentioned before, things like outdated electrical systems that were discovered when doing a minor project, failed septic systems, and the like. I think that what we've learned, and one of the reasons why I was bringing up the average amount of grant funds, I think it would be safe to say, and Ludi Biddle of NeighborWorks of Western Vermont can certainly speak to this next week and is happy to. I think it's safe to say that the Bennington pilot, which started out with that $8,000 cap, generally benefited units that were owned by larger property owners who didn't need as much of an investment and could come up with $16,000 to match with the $8,000 that they were getting. It was really meant to close what was seen as pretty small rental margins in the Bennington area. I think we learned through the rehousing recovery program, the Vhip cares, if you will, that this greater amount of money was able to serve property owners that were smaller and that needed a greater amount of assistance just to keep their property up to code. In many cases, they themselves were moderate income property owners.
Are we frozen?
That makes sense on its face.
Are we frozen here? Or
Nope.
No, nobody's frozen.
Just giving you straight answers.
Right.
Okay, so that's sort of an answer to why the cap was raised. Is that the same answer as to why the cost contribution from the landlord or property owner went down to 10%?
It was 10% in the cares, again, because we're dealing with the need for expediency and trying to address as many units as we could. We wanted to make it a program that was of interest to people. Bear in mind that we were asking folks to bring a unit online between September and December of the same year, so not exactly a small feat. We've since raised that match to 20%, so double what we were asking for in the cares.
And it's in the form of a loan that gets forgiven after 5 or 10 years of performance, being that they keep rents down and
Essentially, there are two options for the property owner. They can commit to 5 years of affordability and renting to somebody who is exiting homelessness. And that could be a single tenant, or they have to release at turnover with a new person exiting homelessness. Or option two is 10 years of affordability, and not necessarily having to deal with the homeless referral, but it does have to be a person who is below 80% area median income.
And in terms of the
grants versus the loans.
Well, that wasn't going to be my question, but that's a good.
Sorry.
Is that so? They just become a forgivable loan once they meet those requirements?
Correct. We've structured the two options a little bit differently, calling the first one a grant. Mostly it's a bit of semantics, because if the performances are met, they both options ultimately end up being a grant. We were trying to make the 5-year commitment to renting to somebody exiting homelessness a little more attractive than the 10-year. The way the 10-year is structured is technically it's a 0% deferred loan, and every year of performance, it gets reduced by 10%. So at the end of 10 years, it will have functioned as a grant.
Okay. And the rent, when you say affordable, is that sort of tied to some formula that the state housing authority uses?
Yes, it's tied to the state housing authority's payment standards, which is roughly akin to the HUD fair market rent, with utility allowances. We can get into the weeds a little bit, but it basically is the amount of rent that is allowed for a housing choice voucher, a Section 8 voucher. So these units would be available to somebody who is utilizing a housing voucher.
And somebody who would pay the equivalent. They don't have to have.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So is there more you want to explain about the proposal at this point and why it varies from what we originally enacted in the Senate last time?
Only to reiterate that we thought it was a pretty successful program run through the CARES Act funding, which is why we've made these recommendations.
And you're going to get us something on the history of the CARES. I saw some emails back and forth that a report has not been issued yet on, and the program is still ongoing, I guess, to a certain degree. But you're going to get, can you get us, if you haven't already, get us something in writing on the whole history? In addition, if we take testimony from, I guess, the home ownership, what's the group, what are the groups called that?
The
that-
home
Neighbor Works is Lutie Biddles in Bennington area.
No, but I mean, what's the generic name for?
Oh, home ownership centers.
correct.
Home ownership centers.
And Senator, I did put together, or I believe it was earlier this week, a 2-page memo with the history of the Vhip program that includes the CARES Act that should be hopefully.
It's on our website, I believe yesterday under Sarah's name.
Okay.
Is that right? I think Sarah sent it to Nathan. Is that right, Nathan? I think that's right.
I emailed it to you all over the weekend and then Nathan posted it.
Right.
So I hope no one's mistakening my question as I try and do my due diligence here.
Yeah, no, these are
my-
good questions.
My goal is to make sure we're making this money go as far as possible, and these parameters of matching and caps make a difference, and we want to find the right sweet spot. I remember, I think it was this program that I had some concern with administrative costs, because
Yeah.
money was going to you and then you were subcontracting to somebody else and they were subcontracting to somebody else, and it had to happen real quickly, and people were admittedly saying they were paying top dollar. Do we have any controls that most of this money will go to the rehab?
Certainly. So we, DHCD took no administrative money out of this program. My time was pro bono. The home ownership centers were originally capped at no more than $7,500 per unit. They ended up only needing to spend about $5 per unit. And while that might sound high for a scattered site project like this, that level of administrative cost is actually pretty low. And just to put things in context, and this might be didactic, but right now the going rates per unit for our typical perpetually affordable housing are coming in between $280,000 and $300,000 per unit. So a $30,000 investment to bring a unit online is actually comparatively a pretty modest public investment.
Sorry, would you just say that one again, Sean? Because
Please.
that is way high. 400, would you just repeat what you just said?
The latest, many of the proposals from our nonprofit organizations, who admittedly need to jump through a lot of regulatory hoops in order to produce the type of housing that is perpetually affordable and meets all the weatherization standards and accessibility and the like, have been coming in lately at between $280,000 and $300,000 per unit. So again, a $30,000 investment to get a private landlord to commit to 5 to 10 years of affordability is, in my opinion, a comparatively modest. And that I say that certainly not to admonish the work of our nonprofit partners. What they're doing is quite a bit different. We're fixing up an old car to get it going for a little longer. They're building a high-speed rail system that's going to last for forever.
Well,
Um,
nothing lasts forever, and we're
Well,
Wait.
hopefully the rehab is more than just a little bit longer, but
Yeah.
um,
hopefully the rehab is as good as a new unit. So
so
I mean,
so what is the average? So in the CARES program, we had a 30,000 grant, and you said the average grant was something like 24.
yes.
20, yeah.
Okay, so with the 20% match, that would be another, they would get 20% of 24, or another, they would have to contribute 4,800 at least to the project.
In theory, yes. I would actually think that the average amount per project would go down with a 20% match, because the CARES funding only asks for 10. So the match on the average grant and the CARES funding is only $4,000,
And what I'm trying to get at, in
$2,000.
most cases, I assume the amount of the grant and the amount of the match doesn't necessarily meet the total cost of the project, does it?
In these cases, I don't see what scenario would arise if that would cause somebody to take out less than the maximum if they had to match more than the 10 or 20%. If
Really?
the project cost was going to be, beyond $36,000, then you would, that would be the only reason why you take out the maximum grant, and that obviously wasn't the case in a majority of these, which is what brings down the average amount.
So you're saying that going forward, you would expect the developers, even though they see $30,000 open to them as help, and all they have to put up is $6,000, they wouldn't take that 30,000 if the project was going to be a $70,000 project?
Oh, certainly in that case it would, but I guess what I'm saying is what the information in the CARES Act indicates, since the maximum, or since the average grant funds per unit served are less than the maximum, that indicates to me that they took out what they needed,
Right.
plus and then added their match, and that was the total cost of the project, which in this case would be just shy of 26,000.
Right, but you have metrics that would show how many of your projects took out the maximum amount of the grant, and for that universe, it could be that the project was even more expensive and that the landlord went into their pocket for the rest of it.
Oh, undoubtedly. Yeah.
Do you have an average cost of the entire unit project on each one of these 206 projects?
We were very focused on recording the grant funds that went out, so I don't have that information at my fingertips, although I'm sure the homeownership centers with a little homework could.
Yeah, so we could get that when we talk with Ludi.
I believe.
Yeah. Sarah's nodding her.
Well, I don't know.
But yeah, it would make sense that would be the case.
I will just caveat that we, in our reporting, we were asking them simply to report out on the grant amount per unit and ensure that at least a 10% match was there. So once that 10% was hit, I can't guarantee that they kept track of how much more than the 10% was spent on the project. But from what we've heard anecdotally, there were a number of cases where projects, property owners vastly exceeded that 10% match requirement.
Okay, right.
Okay, so Allison, you're still in charge, but well, I'm just a committee member asking questions.
No, your questions are terrific and very important for us to have confidence as we move forward with this. Your other area of concern that Sean addressed was the ADU issue, and
Right.
are you ready to move to that question?
Yeah, let's do that.
Sure. So firstly, I must say I misspoke yesterday after hearing from the homeownership centers, all but one of them. There were actually no ADU projects that ultimately got funding through the CARES Act. There were a couple instances where a multifamily unit had a large unit that was not marketable get turned into 2 or more smaller units, which we considered, bringing a new vacant unit online, but would not technically meet the definition of an ADU. The one exception, and I believe it was from Downstreet, and I got some of the information from them, but not all, that a recovery residence applied for, and I don't know if they ultimately received funding to convert a carriage barn behind one of the houses where they do recovery residences. That technically would be considered an ADU. And I know that Champlain Housing Trust worked with Cathedral Square to create a new unit in one of their elderly service properties, which I guess could technically be considered an ADU. To be honest, I think it's it should be noted. I know that there was some concern yesterday about whether this was sort of a handout. Just to point out that, to provide a little context, the HUD fair market rent, not to go too into the details, but that's set at an estimation of what is the cheapest 40th percentile of a given area. So in other words, 60% of the units in an area are rented on market rent are higher than the HUD quote unquote fair market rent. So just for context, the Burlington area fair market rent for 2021 for a 1-bedroom apartment is currently $1,265 per month. At that rate, somebody who invested $30,000 and was interested in creating an ADU would earn back that money in 23 months and change. So 2 years. That's if they rented at the 40th percentile, which is HUD fair market rent. So there's really, considering the fact that you could presumably, if you are not involved in this program, create an ADU and rent at higher than the HUD fair market rent, you'd get your money back in the Burlington area in less than 2 years. So there's not a whole lot of incentive to take $30,000 of quote unquote free money to create an ADU if you're already inclined to, and lock yourself into 5 to 10 years of affordability.
Right.
Much easier to make your money back plus some over that period of time. So I think this really is, at the rate that we're talking, a focus on those who would not otherwise be developing these types of units. And I just say that the purpose of this program was twofold. One was to address serious code health and habitability issues, and the other was to bring new units online for what I've called a comparatively modest public investment. Whether that new unit is brought online because you're fixing a dilapidated building and that was underutilized, or you're creating a new unit in a building that's not yet dilapidated, but still underutilized, I think is a bit of a distinction without a difference. It's still a new unit that will be locked in at these affordability levels for 5 to 10 years. So I think that I don't want to get too overly caught up on the word accessory and accessory dwelling unit.
I guess I had a different recollection of the purpose of this program. I thought the criteria were blighted or code violation or vacant. I didn't know that it was there to produce potentially new affordable housing. I thought it was sold to us in part based upon our Rutland visit, seeing all these huge mansions that were just sitting vacant in disrepair. So now you're talking about, even though it is dictated somewhat by the marketplace, you want some of this money to go to properties that could produce semi-perpetual affordable housing. I didn't know, we have a lot of programs that do that in some ways already. I didn't know this program was designed to do that as well. And it doesn't sound like the take-up rate has been significant at all. I love accessory units. If we were dealing with this from scratch, it may be that there would be different guidelines for the accessory dwelling units that helps target and gets even more money and more take-up. But I'm a little unclear what you're saying. You're saying this particular section is important to the department to keep in?
So it is important. I think it's a useful way to get new units. I guess my response would be that that vacant, dilapidated unit in Rutland's, the not hypothetical, the ones that are there, that's not housing somebody. So it's 0 units if nobody can functionally live there.
Right.
So fixing the issues to bring it back online is the same as building a new unit, just for a lot less of the cost, and frankly reinvesting in some of the existing stock. And I would say further, if that mansion in Rutland, that 6-bedroom, that's no longer marketable for the type of households that we have in Vermont these days, aging households and smaller, younger households.
Right.
Creating an accessory unit within said mansion, so that now you have a 2-bedroom and a 4-bedroom is also a net new unit. So that would qualify as an accessory dwelling unit. So sort of the vacant and blighted was always, I think, meant to ultimately have the result of bringing new units into the market that were not in the market or had fallen out of the market.
Okay, so now I'm confused, because I thought the mansion, dilapidated and all that stuff would qualify for this program under the first criteria and doesn't need the accessory unit provision to qualify for.
No, it would certainly qualify as vacant and blighted, and code non-compliant if if instead it was, let's say, not a dilapidated mansion, but just not terribly marketable.
Well, you could also have a big house in a downtown,
Exactly.
with somebody who wanted to create another unit in the house to make it financially feasible to stay in the house, and creating that new unit with more people living in that big house, to me, is something we would want. I mean, to me, I would love to encourage that, and that's what this also would enable, having this ADU opportunity for a house that is in okay shape, but that the new unit within the house would be even in better shape and would be housing more people.
Correct.
I guess, again, to be clear, I don't necessarily disagree. I didn't know that was the purpose of the program we passed last year. It seems to be a change, and it's not as targeted as where we had originally wanted money
Well,
to go.
I think,
So let's try
Michael,
and move on.
Michael, I think I think all of these programs have been designed to bring more units online. All of them, we hope, have been designed to make affordable houses available for people who can't afford fair market rate. I actually think this serves the larger purpose and the larger value of what we're trying to do with all our housing work. And so I think to that end, it serves and it benefits, quite frankly. I mean, yes, there were no uptakes particularly, and it would be interesting, and we will ask to track the uptake on this, obviously, as we go forward. But to me, this benefits from further thinking, and I think further thinking and trying to bring some of these places that could house more people if they invested a small amount of money, to me, is a good investment. I mean, I live in a town with houses that are way too big for the one person who lives in them. And it would be great, and I represent 26 towns. Many of them have those kinds of places. And if there aren't units, which we still haven't built, for them to downsize into, then let us bring more people to that big unit that they own and make multiple units out of it. Is in a downtown and village center, to me, is particularly appealing.
And if I may, I think the it's a little incorrect to suggest that there was no uptake in the interest in ADUs. There were applications that came in. The fact that none of them were funded indicates the prioritization that we allowed the homeownership centers to have. They were prioritizing dilapidated units before considering ADUs. Having this as you've noted, this program will go into statute. Whether it has an ongoing appropriation is still up for discussion. But having the option of ADU development allows for the flexibility for the homeownership centers to alter that priority if and when we have success in bringing dilapidated units online, and then can pivot to addressing, potentials for accessory dwelling units if that fits a particular region.
Is there language in the bill right now that I think you just made the case I was trying to make, is that they had been working on dilapidated units only, and then they got some authority to go to accessory units, and they prioritized the dilapidated units. So my point is, if we have a limited amount of money, do we want to prioritize the dilapidated units over new accessory dwellings? And if we do, is there that authority within this piece of legislation, or is it on a first come, first served basis? Where does it say that they have to prioritize dilapidated units as the original and primary focus of this program? I'm just trying to make sure if we have a limited amount of money that we focus on where the priority is. And if Senator Clarkson, you feel the priority should be on accessory apartments, then we should say that.
No, I don't think it should be a priority, but I think it's great to include as an option. I think the priority has always been bringing units back online that were dilapidated or vacant.
So does it say that in the bill?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the beginning of the creation of the program on page 25. It says,
Sean or David Hall could answer the question.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't believe that there's an explicit prioritization. We worked, as you know, we worked with the, there is language in the purpose, recognizing that Vermont's rental stock is some of the oldest and, to paraphrase, needs assistance. We felt it was important to leave some flexibility and discretion to the homeownership centers who understand their regions better than we do at DHCD to make decisions about whether it made sense to prioritize blighted units, which was discussed with them, or I think I would like to leave some level of discretion to those who are on the ground and know the region, to decide whether or not a particular ADU might be a better fit than a dilapidated unit, even though both are coming in. Having prioritization put out in the statute to live in perpetuity might end up making for poor decisions. I mean, if you could bring an ADU on for a smaller grant than fixing up that dilapidated mansion, I would like to think that would actually spread the funds further and might be a better decision than addressing a blighted unit first.
Does it say in the bill, the flip side of the question, does it say in the bill that there is discretion? I mean, what if someone applies for an ADU 30 days before someone comes in with the dilapidated? Would they have a claim saying, why did you fund the dilapidated place versus our place?
I think that sort of claim would depend on the how the homeownership centers articulate and how they take in the applications. They could decide to do what VHFA did with the mortgage assistance program, where they set a date by which everybody's application needed to come in by, and then decided amongst those, or do a lottery, which I would rather they took a look at all the applications. I mean, alternatively, there could be I think what you're describing is sort of a rolling application, and I would advise against that for the very reasons that you brought up.
Well, I'm not suggesting one way or another. I'm just saying we should be clear in the statute at some point.
At the moment, Michael, it says it's a program intended to incentivize private apartment owners to make significant improvements to both housing quality and weatherization by providing grants and forgivable loans that are matched in part by the property owner. And that is all it says in terms of that. That is the purpose of the of this
Okay,
program.
we're not gonna get, in terms of this bill today, into any kind of more detailed weeds, in terms of
It-
writing it. We need to vote this bill out in 15 minutes. So I would suggest, Madam Vice Chair, that unless other people have things they feel compelled to say to us, that we hear from David on the mortgage lien issue, and then have him quickly walk through, very quickly again, the Vhip portion, and then we proceed to a vote.
I think that sounds like a good idea. And if we're going to continue conversations with the Homeownership Center next week, we can certainly further clarify that. And if we need to do an amendment that would make us all feel more comfortable, we can do that.
Okay, so David,
Okay.
is David with us?
Yep. David's with us.
I'm here. So to be honest, I'm trying to write out about 4 other bills that need to be voted out this morning. So I'm not entirely sure what you need from me at this moment. Could you please?
No, I'm sorry, Allison, why don't I just take over at this point so we can get to closure, okay?
If you would like to take over, you are welcome.
Thank you. You did a marvelous job,
Oh,
fabulous,
darling, thank you.
fabulous job.
I was driving us to a vote. Don't worry. So you go for it.
So David, I think there's some section that you wrote with Chris Delia at the end, and we kept being referred back to you to explain it to us.
That piece is specific to the Vhip program. So are you keeping Vhip in this draft?
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, so it's language recommended by, by the bankers, and it relates to the priority of liens, either for a grant that is converted to a loan or for a forgivable loan. And it says that any, loan that is, or grant that is issued under the program is subordinate to an existing lien on the property. I think that goes without saying. I'm not sure that part is necessary.
Right.
The other piece, though, says that any grant or forgivable loan issued under the program will also be subordinate to any subsequent first mortgage on the property. And that's a policy choice, whether as a matter of statute you want to give priority to, any first mortgage on the property.
Why, if the state has a loan out there, let's say for 5 years, and there's a default in the conditions of it, and the loan is now repayable, why would the state want to give up its right to be first in line to some future mortgage that's issued?
Well, it specifically says for a subsequent first mortgage, so I assume this would only arise in the context of a first mortgage being refinanced. It wouldn't be a second mortgage, I guess.
It would be refinancing.
That would be fine with me. I think we need to say that. Is there a quick fix we could do, or we could possibly do that as a floor amendment later?
I mean, it does say in the language first mortgage. So
what does it say? Say that again.
The language does say any subsequent first mortgage. So I don't know the technical, if there's any need or way to technically rewrite that. I mean, at this point, I think everybody knows what it means.
That's fine. I know you're busy. So as long as everybody knows what it means, and if we need to correct it, we will. I hear subsequent first mortgage as a totally new first mortgage that comes forward subsequent in time. I don't read it as being a refinancing. I have no problem with the refinancing, but I mean, I might have problems with the refinancing if it's totally different, you know, if it goes from $1,000 mortgage to $1 million mortgage. But anyhow, if it can be, if we can agree that that's the intent, and we can tweak that at a later date, or when the bill comes, or the House can deal with it, I'm fine with it. So
Okay.
the next
Right.
step now in moving to a vote, unless other people have questions or concerns from witnesses, or the witnesses want to say something, would be to have David just go through the Vhip section again, and to hear if anybody wants to make any changes. And I think I've stated my position is that I may, but I'm going to withhold them and defer to the administration's position at this point, subject to reviewing the history and having a few other questions. And, you know, and it's all, for me, it's all about the qualifications for the program, the size of the grant, this latest issue about giving these local authorities broad-ranging discretion as to who gets the money, you know, where accessory dwellings fall in this. Um, and I'm not saying I made any firm decisions on anything. I just want to, I'll leave that open. So, David, if you can pull up the Vhip portion of the bill, and quickly, you're doing a great job on walking us through things quickly, which I like. And I know we did this probably yesterday, but we're about to vote, so I think we would benefit from your oversight of the bill, of that
Sure.
section of the bill.
Yeah, happy to do that. David Hall, Legislative Counsel. I'm on page 25, section 9, the adding of the Vhip program to statute. I'll quickly go through it. You know, I'll note places and issues that, you know, you want to think about.
Okay.
So creating the program, pass through to statewide regional housing profit organizations.
David, can you pull that up, or do I need to look on our website?
It's right in front of you, I think.
Okay. I'm sorry. It is up in front of me. I was on the wrong page. Go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. So creation again, and then, so remember that this, you know, takes this step towards grants and forgivable loans, and it's to private landlords, rehab and weatherization. And as I said yesterday, 3 classes of eligible units, either non-code compliant, vacant, or accessory dwelling. Those are the 3 categories that are eligible for a grant. Under C here, administration, the onus will be on the department to require housing organizations to ensure, you know, certain uniform practices in the administration. So under C1, standard application to describe the process, instructions, etc. Award process that ensures equitable selection of landlords, and a grant and loans management system that ensures accountability. Under D, the program requirements that are applicable to both grants and forgivable loans. So right now, under D1, the max is $30,000 per unit. Under D2, the landlord contribution is for matching funds or in-kind services that equal or exceed 20% of the value of the grant or loan. 3, all projects have to have a weatherization component. 4, all projects have to comply with the applicable building, housing, health codes. 5, it has to make sure that the grant or loan agreement will apply both to the original recipient and to successors in interest, as long as the grant or the loan period are outstanding. So by default, that's 5 years for grants, 10 years for forgivable loans. So whatever instruments they use will have to ensure that those successors and interests are still covered by it. Subsection E, so this is specific to grants. So for a grant awarded under the program, it's a minimum of 5 years. The landlord has to coordinate with the nonprofit housing partners to identify tenants. Under 2, the landlord shall lease the unit to a household that is exiting homelessness. But under B, if upon petition, you know, they determine that a household exiting homelessness cannot be found, then the landlord has to rent the unit to a household with an income equal to or less than 80% of AMI And if that person can't be found, then with approval of the department. Under 3 here, a landlord shall accept any housing vouchers that are available to pay all or a portion of the tenant's rent and utilities. B, if no housing voucher or subsidy is available, total cost of the unit, including utilities not covered by rent, can't exceed fair market rent. You know, I think there's questions about the details of this. I mean, I wrote this to try to reflect what I understood the intent to be as far as what the duty of the landlord is to accept this and to make sure we're accounting for all the subsidies and everything else. So I haven't heard anybody say that looks incorrect, the words that I've used. So I trust that that looks okay. Under 4 here, a landlord may convert a grant to a forgivable loan with approval of the department and the housing organization. And if they do, then that grant converted to the loan receives a 10% credit for loan forgiveness for each year in which the landlord participates in the grant program.
Say that again.
So remember, let me take one big step up. Remember that the difference really between the grant, the 5-year grant and the 10-year forgivable loan is the requirements on the landlord to rent the house to, target populations. If you're on the 5-year grant free money side, then it's more restricted. It has to start with a homeless family. From there, it goes, up with approval to 80% of AMI, et cetera. It's not quite as strict on the forgivable loan side. So if a landlord wants to switch over from grant to loan, then basically for every year you get a 10% credit against forgiveness for the loan. And after 10 years, that's when the final forgiveness happens. So if you do switch over from the grant to the forgivable loan, this says you get that 10% credit for each year you are participating in the grant program, and we'll convert you to the forgivable loan.
And so I assume you'll get to this. What if someone defaults on the requirements of the grant or the loan?
Yeah, well, then they're in default of the agreement with the organization and the department. And not only would the loan be repayable, but whatever default provisions are in their agreement would govern recapture, penalties, et cetera. I don't know the details of what they write into those agreements.
Oh, so there's no requirement here that these loans and grants be secured by the property?
I'm sure they would be, but I think that's sort of an assumption on the part of the statute. I mean, it says, yeah, let me leave it at that.
That may be covered in the agreement that the home ownership center has with the landlord. Sean, has that been, that's something we could look at with one of the home ownership center people.
That has been our practice. We put a covenant and a lien on the property.
And it's filed in the land records in each case?
Correct.
Okay, I think I'd like to see that in statute at some point. Let's go on.
So under F for the forgivable loans, it's a minimum of 10 years. And here the landlord, again, has to accept any vouchers that are available. Rent can't exceed fair market rent established by HUD. Under 2, it's a 10-year forgiveness, a 10% forgiveness per year up for that period. And then G is the piece from the bankers about 1, subordinate to existing liens, and 2, subordinate to first mortgage recorded after the filing. And of course, I hear that we might want to make sure under G2 that language is reflective of the fact that you want it to be a refinance of a first mortgage that happens subsequent to the issuance of a grant or a forgivable loan. Right?
I'm pretty sure my real estate law background is kind of stale at this point, but if you're first place with a first mortgage, just by virtue of refinancing, you don't lose your place in line. So that would be fine. So, all right, so going to appropriations.
Yeah, that's it for the substance of it. These first few appropriations all relate to the housing inspection component. And then D is the $3 million general fund DHCD for Vhip.
Okay. One last thing I wanted to raise that I'm interested in exploring a little further. If we look at this again next week, and maybe Sean can answer this, is there any money or where, for technical assistance to landlords in terms of the development and permitting of these rehabilitations? Is there anybody helping them out there, or is that totally on them in this?
That would be the role. That's one of the reasons why we partnered with the homeownership centers, and we actually provide the homeownership centers community development block grant money to do this technical assistance type work anyway. So that would be above and separate from it wouldn't be a cost that would be incurred by this program.
Yeah, and Ludi had described that when we were initially contemplating this. Ludi had discussed that, I believe, from the 2017 pilot.
So
the amount of technical assistance in both marketing it and then helping people navigate it.
So just so I'm clear, I think this program is very attractive to achieve its goals. And landlords out there may be very interested in saving some money, but a big impediment might be just, how do I do this? Where do I go? Can you help get me started? Especially if you're talking about a small time landlord. And you're saying that you feel comfortable that those resources are out there and being marketed at the same time as this grant money.
Absolutely. It's one of the major roles of the homeownership centers is to provide that type of assistance. So
Okay.
They're there to do that.
Okay. Before we move to moving this bill hopefully out of committee, are there any other comments from anyone, committee members or anybody else in the room?
Any from our advocates, Brian, Wendy, Sarah?
That's what
Just obviously, because I've been on this forever, it's so important. And I want to reiterate how important the rehab portion of it is. Even independent of moving stuff to fire safety, we've been talking about this for a long time. And it's really, I think, we were lucky that we had the CARES Act money to really mold the program and learn the lessons. And so this is independently is a critical thing. And I see it as a package with the fact that we are hopefully going to have professional code enforcement, which we desperately need.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for all your work over the decades.
Yes. Here.
Okay.
If I could, I would just add the Affordable Housing Coalition has had this as a priority for those decades and has often felt that the prioritization of rental housing safety perhaps in the past didn't get adequate attention and wasn't prioritized at the level that it needed to be. With the 75,000+ renter households in Vermont, this is a big step forward in terms of protecting them from conditions that in many cases they don't actually have control over, but that affect their lives in a meaningful way. So thank you very much for your work on this.
And thank you.
Thank
you, Brian, for your years of dedication to housing dating back to Burlington Community Land Trust, if I'm correct. So,
Wendy,
could I just add briefly, Wendy Morgan from Vermont Legal Aid, in response to the discussion this morning. For the last 7 months, Legal Aid has worked hard to try to get as many tenants housed as possible or keep them housed. And the lack of housing of any sort at all was just one of the biggest problems. So anything we can do to encourage units online quickly, I would ask you to support.
thank you, Wendy, and for your years of service as well. Okay, Senator Clarkson, would you like to move to amend?
I would. it's making me feel like, we have an opportunity for a Senate Economic Development Awards ceremony at some point, in the middle of, at the end of session. Or it might be a good cabaret act. Yes, I would like to move that we amend S79 with draft 2.1. I believe that's the
right.
first motion.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. I'm trying to get the gallery view here. There we go. Let's do a show of hands on this one. I don't have the full group, so if you do.
Becca is with us by phone.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get back on. My internet is not working properly, but I want to be able to vote on this.
Okay.
So
Well,
let me try one more time.
Aren't you allowed to vote by phone?
No,
Really?
Not
No.
without your visual.
no.
Oh, okay. Well, let's do
So,
let's do the amendment first, and in the meantime,
Okay.
Becca can get on.
Or we can hope.
What's that?
We can hope. She's had internet problems all morning. If
You
you've
know,
noticed.
we can leave the vote open for her too. So all those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. And Senator Brock, I can't see you, but is your hand up?
Yes, it's up. All our hands.
It is
are
up.
All right, thank you.
Your hand is not up, Mr. Chair.
Oh, it was. It was.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's 4-0 on the amendment.
No, Becca's there.
Becca, I thought couldn't vote.
No, she's right there. We can see her.
Oh, I'm sorry, having trouble with my screen.
Well,
Okay.
she's passed the cooties on to you.
Okay,
The internet
So
cooties.
5-0 on the amendment. Madam Vice Chair, would you like to make a subsequent motion?
I certainly would. I'd like to move that we approve S79 as amended.
Okay, any discussion? Okay,
I would just like to reiterate the chair and say thank you to all these advocates and the decades of work on this. And remember, it's just the beginning. We can get it better and better as we go along.
Senator Ram, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Senator Ballant,
Yes.
Senator Brock,
Yes.
myself, Senator Ram, yes. Senator Clarkson,
Yes.
Senator Sirotkin.
Yes. Okay, so Senator Clarkson has graciously agreed to report this bill and talk with Nathan and Keisha to get we had a lot of snafus yesterday with the secretary's office as to the protocol. I think there was a lot of things floating around in his office. So talk with Nathan and Keisha, and I think all you need to do is get this version on an email chain to him with your name on the email saying the vote was 5-0 on the amended version.
Right. No, I remember. I just need David to say who is Dave. Oh,
He's not.
yeah, he's gone.
I'll copy him on the record of action so that you can then ask for the committee report and get that all to John Bloomer, which was a comedy of errors yesterday. So
Got it. Thank you. And
What-
thank you, everybody. This is just such important work, and I think really complements all the work we're doing with our downtowns and smart growth. And this is yet another tool in that toolbox, which we need to create more tools.
Okay.
But this is one of them. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Madam
you.
Vice Chair. We're gonna take a 10-minute break till 9:50, and we'll pick up with S10 and the UI issues at that point. Thank you.
Great.